Good evening, Mr. Cameron. Thanks for coming back in today. I noticed your wife couldn't be here today. Is everything going okay with that?
Oh yeah, no problems there. Just had a few work things come up, but just want to make sure we were able to keep the meeting, make sure everything was going according to plan.
Okay, yeah, no, I understand. So I did a bit of research, and I know that you guys are wanting to do a step-parent adoption for your daughter, for your current wife. So before I get into that, has anything changed between your last meeting and the meeting today?
I wouldn't say much has changed. There was another present that came from Ashley's grandmother, which isn't too out of the norm at this point. But there was a note in there that mentioned that Carrie was back in the Riverdale area after her last 4 months in jail. Her mother mentioned that perhaps she might have learned a lesson after that time, but also maybe not. So the only thing weird was that note, but everything else has pretty much been the same.
So her mother knows where she's at now. Right?
That's correct. Yeah, from what that note made it sound like.
Okay, and she was in jail during that time period. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it said in the last 4 months that's where she was.
Okay. Well, we're gonna keep that in mind while we kind of go through the process of what a step-parent adoption actually entails. So kind of just to start the process, it is 2 different steps. So there's actually 2 different court proceedings. There's a termination of parent right proceeding, and then there's the adoption itself. So there's actually 2 different types of steps. So we have to terminate Carrie's parental rights first for your daughter, and then we actually do the adoption. So considering that we now know where Carrie is, that may change our process a little bit here. So the termination of parental rights, it is a court proceeding, but the termination can be voluntary or involuntary. So since we do know her location, at least a little bit from her mom, this may make this different. So a parent can voluntarily consent to the termination by signing a written document ahead of time, and then the court goes and accepts that document and terminates, which would be Carrie's rights. Alternatively, the petitioning party, which would be us, can provide grounds for termination of these parental rights, and if that is the case, the court may then terminate the rights involuntarily. So there's grounds for that, and we can kind of go over that as well. So we're gonna, I would assume we're gonna have to file one of those 2 things. So I guess
Right.
Since we kind of know her location, we can go down the route of trying to voluntarily get her to terminate her own rights, or we can reach out to her mom and see if we can send her a letter, try to reach out to her.
I'm not sure. The note actually said that Carrie would be in touch when she's straightened out, so I don't know if that necessarily would work out the best. I mean, it sounds like she's still kind of interested in this and kind of taking this all the way. So if she's trying to be in touch with everything, I don't know if that's going to be our best option or not.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. That's something I just don't know much about. If who has the amount of say in that situation.
Okay. Well, we'll have to just see. I would say the best thing we can do is at least see if she's willing to do that first.
Yeah, wouldn't hurt.
We'll kind of just see. They have to find, the absent parent must sign that document, and it's a consent and a waiver. So if that happens, then the termination of parental rights will be voluntary. The absent parent, so in this case Carrie, will not receive notice of any other court hearings, and the court will terminate the rights based on her consent.
Gotcha.
So if they've obviously not signed this waiver in the document prior to the filing, a summons is filed simultaneously with the petition, so she would actually get notice to appear in court.
Okay.
So and there's another option, which was applicable prior to today, as you mentioned, if the location of the parent is unknown, you and because of that also me, we have to use due diligence to attempt to locate her. But since we know that now, then it's a little bit different. Obviously, we can at least hopefully get in touch with her, or she will get in touch with us, either one. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I feel like the first step would probably be reaching out to her, or even reaching out to her mom and seeing if we can touch base. But the second part of that whole process, like I said, the first part is the actual hearing for termination, and the second part is the actual judge aspect. So once we file that, a hearing is held within that first 30 days. So within the first 30 days, we will have some sort of hearing on the termination of parental rights. So again, if they sign her consent, or if the petition is not contested, the judge will hear the facts and grant disposition. If the petition is contested, so if she gets a subpoena and comes to court and contests it, the first hearing is a plea hearing, and a fact-finding hearing is then set within 45 days of the first hearing. And so within that 45 days, we have to prove all the factors for why we should terminate Carrie's parental rights. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that.
Okay. So if after that fact-finding period of 45 days, if the judge finds grounds to terminate her rights, then they will do so. So again, that's the first part of that issue. So the second aspect I would say of that smaller trial is that the court appoints a guardian ad litem, which is just a lawyer that will represent your kid's rights. So it doesn't matter if the consent is voluntary or involuntary. The cost of that is borne by us, so that is something to think about. I'm not sure if that's a concern of yours or not. We haven't really discussed those. So do you have concerns of that nature?
Well, it's something we've talked about a lot, and I don't know. I have a friend who's in a court case right now, and he said it was a pretty miserable experience, and it's just been dragging on. And we really want this to happen. We want to go through with this, but we want to avoid court at all costs. We just don't want to have to go through the lengthy time frame and emotional turmoil that involves, and we're just really hoping to avoid that if we can.
Well, yeah, I understand that, and it's definitely, I don't know what kind of trial or what your friend's involved in, but typically the cost with this is, I don't want to say relatively minor compared to other things, but it kind of just depends. Like if Carrie signs off on her consent, it's pretty small, because even assigning the attorney for your child as a guardian ad litem, the cost is relatively minor,
Right.
especially if it's uncontested. So we can kind of cross that bridge as we come to it. If she's going to contest it, then we can maybe talk about that a little bit further.
Yeah, okay, that'd be good.
Okay, and then the second aspect of all of this, so the first part is the termination of parental rights, and the second part that we need to think about is the step-parent adoption proceedings.
Okay.
They are filed simultaneously with that parental rights termination. So we would have your wife file a petition joined by you, who is her spouse,
Yep.
Asking the court to approve the adoption of your kid. So as part of this, the County Department of Social Services will perform a step-parent screening and they'll file a report with the court. And so if the termination of parental rights is by consent or voluntary, the hearing of adoption takes place immediately after. So ideal circumstances, if Carrie voluntarily does all of this, theoretically your daughter could be adopted within the next 30 days.
Okay.
Because the proceeding for the adoption happens directly after the other one.
Right.
If it's obviously contested, then that's like a different story. If, like I said, best case scenario, we would have her voluntarily sign away the rights. The step-parent adoption hearing takes place right after. A guardian ad litem is not required for the step-parent adoption process, so that takes out that cost as well. And then we can also talk about, when we get to that point, if the order for the adoption contains a directive that the name of your child will be changed if requested. So if you guys would like to change her last name, then we can do a new birth certificate that will be issued by the state. And then it's kind of up to you guys. You guys can do that or not. That's something we can talk about at a later date if you guys would like.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want the name change. I mean, again, that's just part of this process for us. If it involves having to go to court, then, I guess like you said, we'll have to choose the best course of action there. But really, we're just again, we're trying to avoid that if we can. But if it's not as bad as you've, or if it's better than what we've heard from our friend, then maybe we can get through it.
And then I would just like to point out one thing: if Carrie does terminate her parental rights and your daughter is adopted, Carrie and anyone related to her through her as a parent becomes a legal stranger to the child. So all child support obligations end, as well as all the rights and responsibilities flowing from parent to child.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind too. So there is no filing fees or court costs with filing any of this. The only court costs at this time would be the ad litem fees for the termination of parental rights, and all hearings are closed and confidential. So they're not open to the public or anything like that. So really, the only cost will come if we have to do a hearing, if it's an involuntary, if Carrie doesn't sign off on that.
Okay.
So going from here, what would you like to do? Would you like to try to reach out to Carrie? Do you just want to try to go and do into fact finding and hope that the court sides with you guys? Where would you like to go with this process?
Well, you've laid a lot out here and given us a lot to consider. My wife's not here, and I think with everything going on, I just kind of like to get your opinion on how you would handle this, what your best advice would be, or maybe what you would do in this situation.
Well, I've never been in this situation, so it is a little hard for me to kind of put myself in your guys' shoes.
Right, that's fair.
But just from the outside looking in, I feel like it can't hurt to, if you guys aren't in a rush to do this, if this isn't something super pressing, you need to do this in the next 30 days, I would say we should reach out to Carrie and try to get her voluntary consent. That would mitigate a lot of the costs in this case, especially since we now at least have some sort of idea of where she is. That's what I would recommend going forward if cost is one of your biggest concerns, especially.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good. I think that'd be the probably most path of least resistance for everyone, if in the long run, especially if that were to work. So I think we can be on board with taking that action to begin with.
Okay, alright, well then we'll go from here, and I'll make sure to give you an email with all of this in writing so you can give it to your wife and kind of go over it with her before you make any final decisions.
That'd be really good. I appreciate that.
Okay, thanks for coming in today.